And as I'm looking up, I see a gentleman there who's in my house robbing me, pointing what turns out to be my own gun at me.
Wow.
And it's like your life in these moments, and I've only experienced this before in combat. It's like a split second seems like it's 10 years.
Hey, welcome back to the Star Power Podcast. I am James Barbour, and I have a guest who I've just met, but in researching this gentleman, for those of you who are watching this on video, you can see him here. In researching this gentleman, first I was blown away by his pedigree and his history. I'm sitting there going, "Oh my gosh, this guy's done so much, and now he's doing so much more." But when I read his bio, which I'm going to share with you right now, I said, this is somebody who needs to be on the podcast because there's a kismet in terms of his focus and where he wants to go. So, my guest is John Miles, and John's passion lies in helping people unlock their full potential by living intentionally and with purpose. And for those of you who follow me, you know that that is exactly what I feel as well. And through his experience as a Navy officer, Fortune 50 executive, check that out, 50. I don't want to talk about that. And now as a podcast host and author, he's seen the transformative power of taking control of our own lives, making deliberate choices, and embracing personal growth. He's deeply committed to empowering others to break free from complacency, which is huge. You hear me talk about action creates traction. Tap into their true passions and ignite a life of meaning and fulfillment. So, John Miles, welcome. Thank you for reaching out and wanting to be on the Star Power podcast. I'm grateful that you're here.
Well, James, it's my honor for being here, and I can't believe that we're doing this and we only live about a mile away from each
I
other.
know,
So
it's
in
so
the future, we
funny.
got to get in a studio and record some of these live together.
I would love that. You know, it's funny. Brandon T. Adams, I don't know if you follow Brandon. I reached out to him. Great guy. And I'm like, hey, you want to come on the podcast? You go, you want to do it live? I'm like, I don't have a studio set up yet. So it's so funny. We found out as we're talking, we're literally a stone's throw away from each other. So thank
Uh,
you so much. I want you to talk because it's here on the screen for those of you who are watching it, your book, Passion Struck, and that's sort of your brand as well. Is that correct? Can you talk about that a little bit about where that came from?
I really love telling this story because 4 years ago, passion struck wasn't even a word or a phrase in my mind. I didn't even, had never even heard of it before, but I happened to be talking to a friend of mine, Keith Crotch, and people who are in the entrepreneur community, Silicon Valley community, probably know who Keith is. He started Ariba, sold it for a big exit to SAP, and then more recently, he was the CEO and chairman of DocuSign, a company most of us have heard of. Took that to billion-dollar plus status, and then became really the undersecretary of state, where he was trying to help entrepreneurs. And I happened to be having a conversation with him, a mentoring one, and I really had told him how I was trying to transform my life. And at the time, I'd been doing this deep research on luminaries from across everything from business people like I was to military leaders to performers like yourself, etc. And I was trying to figure out what differentiates those who kind of get stuck in their life or career and those who break out. And it was this uncommon knack that they found a problem that was uniquely in their wheelhouse to solve with their innate gifts. They did the inner work to unlock those gifts, and then they were doing whatever it took, whether it was risking their reputation, their financial wealth, their relationships, to try to solve it. And I was talking to him, and he says, it sounds to me like, John, they went from being stuck to becoming passion struck. And I just heard the phrase. I did what anyone would do. I started doing internet searches on it, couldn't find anything, went to GoDaddy, expecting no way that this could possibly be available. And there it was, $12.99.
Wow.
So So I knew right then and there that I was onto something special. The only thing I was worried about is it happens to be a perfume scent from Victoria's Secret. So I was worried, how am I ever going to get my profile up to a point where Passion Struck exceeds that? And
Right.
18 months in, it did. So
Wow.
we're now 3.5 years into using the brand, and so happy that I picked it. And I actually started going down the path of writing the book first,
Uh,
but I started hitting rejection after rejection from agents, and they all kind of said to me, you have a brand, but it's really a business brand. No one knows you for being this person who's talking about personal mastery, self-growth, intentional living. And at the time, it was COVID, and I
mm.
couldn't go out there on the public speaking circuit. So I decided I'll launch this podcast. I'll call it Passion Struck. We'll test the ideas, see how it does. And, 500 episodes we passed this week, 45 million downloads later. It's absolutely resonating, and I am so humbled that the whole brand has gone to where it's gone.
It's tragic because you're passion struck. I mean, I talk about this all the time, and I've faced this same thing that you're talking about in my own world because as I was performing on Broadway, I always saw myself as an entrepreneur. I wrote a book that went to #1 during COVID called The Art of Survival Guide, What They Never Taught You in School. And there's nothing, there are performance-based things in it, but it is not about that. It's about branding because we as artists are entrepreneurs. I'm not selling an iPhone. I'm selling me. I'm selling the the skill set that I have. And so I always looked at that as like a parallel. And then as I started being asked to speak on different stages like 10X Growth Con or ClickFunnels, or I was just at the Investment Fund Secrets or Investment Masterminds, I knew that there was something more. But what was happening similarly was that when I would send out an email to say, hey, what about your mindset? Or what about building yourself in this way? Sometimes people are like, well, wait a minute, aren't you doing a concert? And I'm like, well, yeah, but this is where I am. How do you think I got to where I got? I had to use these things. And there was a disconnect, and I had to sort of re educate, or not re educate, inform people that there was a parallel. Um, I want to talk about, if we can, because you touched on this, your career in prior to doing Passion Struck, because that's nothing to shake a stick at, with Dell and things like that. Because I did a little research on you. Tell me about that and why you made this change. How did that happen?
I think it comes back to something that you started in the introduction talking about, and that is, I think regardless of what we do, we can sometimes fall in the trap of doing what we think we ought to be doing
Mhm.
or what we should have. There's this theory called self-discrepancy theory where you've got your self who you actually are, you've got your odd self who you think you should be, and your ideal self, which is who you could be. And I kind of unintentionally, or maybe it was intentional at the beginning, I went down a path that you and I were talking about before we even came on. I never expected to. So I went in the military because I always saw myself kind of being that action person who was saving people, helping people, trying to change the world. And I got to do that while I was in the military and thought I was going to do it for a career when I chose to get out of the military to go in the FBI. And then when the FBI thing didn't happen, I went down this business path that, looking back as a kid, that was never what I aspired to do, was sit behind a desk. But first I was, a strategy consulting at practicing strategy consulting at Booz Allen. I moved to Arthur Anderson, and I have to tell you, my life, similar to the FBI story, my legs were cut right from out underneath me. I was advancing at Arthur Anderson, and then Enron, for those who are old enough to remember it, hits. I'm at the epicenter because I'm at the Houston office. And within 3 weeks, my multi-million dollar book of business evaporates, and I'm having to find a plan B again.
Mhm.
And so, long story short, I had these fantastic roles at Lend Lease. at Lowe's, at Dell, but I was really becoming complacent with my life, is the best way I can say it. I had found myself sitting in what David Thoreau calls quiet desperation, meaning I just felt like what I was doing didn't matter. Like I wasn't really impacting people's lives. Like I was waking up in the morning and going through the motions, but I wasn't really intentional about where I was trying to take my life at that point, besides trying to make more money, trying to get bigger titles, those things. And more importantly, I didn't think I was touching people in the way that I felt on the inside I really needed to. And
Mhm.
right about this point, and it was before I moved to here to the Tampa area, I started getting these visions. And they'd come to me in dreams, they'd come to me in mindful moments on walks where I was being told, John, you have a greater purpose. You were supposed to be helping. And the words were so clear to me: the beaten, battered, broken, lonely, helpless, bored of the world. And I'm sitting here at that time as a chief information officer at Dell, just thinking, what in the world does that possibly mean? How, given this executive that I am I supposed to go out there and do that? And it just seems so foreign that I'm like, how do you even cross that chasm? How do you even figure out what you're supposed to do to help that group of people? Because it's not as if I'm going to go out and say, I'm the host of the Passion Struck podcast. Welcome all you beaten, bored, battered, lonely, helpless people. I
Yeah.
mean, how is that going to be a calling? So it really, for those who might be sitting in the same spot, it's not something that you just turn the light bulb off and on and you go from being this executive to doing that. For me, it took about 7 years of really inner self work to start understanding. And so I came here to the Tampa area to be the chief digital officer and head of global operations for a company called Catalina. And after I got through that tour, I realized it was just another career move where I was doing the wrong thing.
Mhm.
And it was taking me further and further away from who I was. And I just felt this overwhelming, at one point towards the end of my time there, sense of numbness. I just felt so numb to the world around me. And I realized that the most important things, the relationships in my life, my health, those things I was not devoting my time to. And what I was putting my time to was the constant grind. And it was just leaving me in this position of feeling like those people I've been called upon to help. I mean, I felt battered, beaten, broken, lonely, helpless, bored, out of my mind. And I feel what we are supposed to do is to help the person that we once were. And so that's a long way of telling you that that's where I think my life has gotten to.
I will look what you just said. We are to help the people that we once were. Holy cow. I mean, that, if you take nothing from this podcast interview with John, take that, because the more I hear you, again, we've just met, right? And you're speaking to exactly what my passion is, exactly what I'm doing. Because I sat there, I would sit on stage many times, and I had a college mentor. His name is Richard Mason. And he was like, you know, the little garden gnomes that you used to see on people's lawns, a little chubby gnome with a little hat and a beard. That's what he was like. He was Marilyn Monroe's escort during the USO, all years back overseas. And he used to challenge us. And he used to say, what audacity do you have to stand on stage and ask people to pay money to watch you for 2.5 hours? And I was at first, I was like, what do you mean? And he challenged us and challenged us. And I took it to say, well, what's my responsibility? And we spoke about this briefly and before we started, but my goal is not to go out and proselytize or say believe this or believe that on from a my goal is to enhance and inspire and have people walk out of a space feeling better. And I also realized that at a certain point, I was limited because I was taking someone else's words, whether it's Andrew Lloyd Webber's words or whomever's words who wrote the show or wrote the music, and I was using their words to do that. And I felt this is great. It's amazing. But there's something else that I feel called to do, that I want to do. I was able to reach millions of people that way, but I felt that there was something more. And when you hit those words, we're called to serve, or we're our purpose to serve the people we once were, that resonated with me massively. So well done on that, and I can't wait. We'll go and grab a tea or coffee, quickly here. So you made that choice. You had that calling, you had that realization. I like to talk about those obstacles too, because obviously people who are stuck or battered, broken, feeling down, oftentimes they can't see the forest for the trees, and they're stuck because of the feelings, or if you want to call it depression, or if you want to call it energy, whatever you want to call it, and they can't ignite or reignite that fire that's under them. What did you do once you saw that, and you saw yourself becoming that? What did you do to spark that flame that is on your Passion Struck book cover that I'm seeing right now, to turn the corner, or to make that change?
I love this question, and I'm going to answer it this way. In the second chapter of my book, and my book is organized around 12 principles. So this is in the first principle, which is I use the analogy to become a mission angler, meaning you've got to find a purpose in your life to pursue. But when I was at this completely low point, I went and saw a person who was a career coach, happened to be a performance psychologist, and he had me do this exercise after he had spent a few weeks kind of analyzing where I was. And he said, I want you to imagine that you're sitting on a kitchen stool that has multiple supports. And he goes, as your life is right now, think about the different supports that you have. And I went through them, and I realized that, as I mentioned previously, that one of the supports was way outweighing everything else in my life. And it was the constant grind for high achievement. And it was taking every other area of my life down. And I realized that if I wanted to become this idealized person I hope to be, this self-actualized self, which I don't think we can ever become it, but we can strive to do it, that I had to change the pillars, and I had to weight them so they were in balance.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what people get wrong when they do this is they try to do too many things at one time. And I believe at the heart of it, there is one area of your life that's causing you more imbalance than anything else. And that has got to be the starting point. And for me, it was unresolved trauma. I had been sitting on sexual abuse, um, trauma, combat trauma, physical assault trauma. And the era that I grew up in, or I would say we grew up in, I mean, you were told to suppress these things. I remember being in the military, and the last thing you wanted to do coming off a deployment was going to see a shrink.
Right.
And in fact, it was looked at as a weakness.
I
And
had the
so you,
exact conversation, not to know, with my father-in-law, who I shared it. He was a lieutenant general, Marine Corps, and multiple tours in Vietnam, two Purple Hearts. I mean, went through it, and I said, "How did you deal with it?" He goes, "We just dealt with it. There was no go and talk to somebody." So sorry, I interrupted you, but
no, I mean, that's how my father is a Marine as well, and he was in Cambodia, and I think he has just suppressed it as well. And what I learned from this is I had a tragic event that helped me relook at all of this in 2017. At the time, I was living in St. Pete. I was renting a house because I had gotten divorced a couple years earlier. I had taken my daughter to school and went to Orange Theory like I was doing in those days. It just so happens Orange Theory has an electrical fire that day. And so the fire trucks come. I go home much earlier than expected. I decide I'm going to go to a plan B and go for a bike ride. because I love to cycle. And so I go into the house and I start going up the stairs, and as I'm about halfway up, I start hearing loud breathing, and I realize I'm not in my home alone. And my momentum carried me to the point where it was one of those 90-degree turns, and I was kind of coming across it. And as I'm looking up, I see a gentleman there who's in my house robbing me, pointing what turns out to be my own gun at me.
Wow.
And it's like your life in these moments, and I've only experienced this before in combat. It's like a split second seems like it's 10 years. And at that moment, I had two options. I could either take the momentum and try to go up a flight of stairs and take him head on, or I could try to evade and live to fight another day. And luckily, I picked the later option because I'm not sure I'd be talking to you here today.
Mhm.
But that happened 4 days later. My best friend commits suicide, and I am just, it jumps off the Skyway Bridge if people are familiar with it. And I had spent all day Saturday with him. I had no sense at all that anything was wrong. Turns out he had really bad financial problems in his head. I think he owed $25,000. And I'm like, a bunch of us could have given you the money. But those two things just kind of just sat with me for the next couple months. And I'm just like, what am I doing with my life? It all could have ended. And it's time to stop waiting and it's time to start taking action. And I did what I'd been so afraid to do. I started to do the quiet work of really getting to know myself again. Like, who am I? What makes me tick? And that's where I came to the conclusion that I had to go resolve this well, I mean, at that point, decades of unresolved trauma that I'd been through. And so I went through prolonged exposure therapy, cognitive processing therapy, and other modalities until a point where I had worked through those stuck points. And what I realized going down this path is I was learning to deal with the stuck points and to release them. This funny thing happens that not only do you start working on that one area, but it starts propagating to other areas. And so I
Mm.
started focusing on my physical health. I started focusing on my relationships. I started trying to be a better parent and other things. And before I knew it, all areas of my life were becoming passion struck. And so that's my advice to people who are listening.
Well, I love it. It is an interesting. Wow. I mean, I don't even know what to say to that. I mean, just the journey. Everybody's been on their journeys. I actually did a video on this the other day about being stuck, and I talked about that. You know, someone's adversity might seem massive to another, but yet also might seem small to somebody else. And when you think about someone taking their own lives for $25,000, to him it seemed insurmountable. So much so that that was his choice. And to others, there's a solution. No, we can help you. And that to me, I think, is what drives me, is to show that we can overcome no matter what the obstacle is. We can overcome. I think about what you must have faced in the military or just facing the gentleman in your home. You overcame that, and people are stuck, you know, they're stuck and not struck with the movement to move forward. Is your book available yet, or
Yeah,
can they pre-order it?
the book came out February 6th of this year, so a few months ago, and it's available anywhere you want to purchase it.
Oh, that's great. So we should do that. I also want you to tell people how they can follow you. I want you to tell them about your podcast because I watch some of it on YouTube. Because this is something like my I don't know if you remember the old movie Miracle on 34th Street, where the Santa is saying, "Go over there and buy the thing. Go over there and buy the thing." I'm all about wanting people to go and learn from others and say, you can have a great thing by going to listen to John and going learning from John. That is part of what this podcast is about. It's part of who I am. So can you tell people how they can follow you and how they can find you as well?
Yeah, so I have a famous cousin. He's now deceased in England named John Miles, who was a rock star back in the 70s. And so it's impossible to to actually take his domain string, and you can find me at John R. Miles on all the socials, or johnrmiles.com, or passionstruck.com. And it's interesting. I recently was interviewing someone who was his uncle. He said that his best friend was Robert Plant from Led Zeppelin, and he used to hang out when he was a kid with the band and the Rolling Stones and everyone from that era. So it was quite incredible to talk to him, because the first concert I ever went to when I was 18 months old, my crazy uncle Jerry took me to see Led Zeppelin.
At 18 months old, and it's been ingrained in you ever since. You either have a deep passion for it or a deep disdain. It was interesting when my wife does not, she's not like I love like action films, like Iron Man and stuff like that. And she doesn't like horror. She doesn't like, she just, she's just like, she doesn't like the films. Or she'll go, but it's not her thing. And I remember she was pregnant with our first daughter, and we went to see one of the Iron Man films, and we were sitting there, and every time there was explosion, my daughter would kick and kick. I'm like, she's either gonna love these films or she's gonna hate them. She doesn't really watch them, so maybe there's the answer. Um, is there anything
Well,
else that you
can I
go
just
ahead?
jump in? Yeah,
Yeah,
can I just jump in? Because I love you brought Iron Man up, because if someone is still sitting here thinking they can't change their life, then Robert Downey Jr. is probably the best example of someone I can't even imagine hitting more rock bottom than he did in his life. And to look at what he's done and the change and his sobriety and everything else,
yeah,
I mean, look at his backstory and what he's done. I mean, that from your industry is a clear example of someone who's
yeah.
completely changed his approach to life and has come out the other side so much stronger.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure if you're aware, but I at the first 10X Growth Con, I was speaking and singing on that stage, and I had been looking for the person that I always go to. Well, who is behind Robert Downey's growth, like his change, his comeback? And I was looking, and I was looking, and I was looking, and I was looking, and I had met a woman named Gloria Mayfield Banks, who's an incredible speaker. At the time, she sold her business to her daughter, but she was the number one person in Mary Kay. And the irony was is that there was a woman in Phantom with me who played Carlotta, one of the principals, who was a Mary Kay rep. And when I was talking about going to speak at Grant's event, the first one ever, and the lineup was there, and Gloria Mayfield Banks was there, and Michelle, her name was, she flipped out. She goes, "Oh my gosh, you need to meet this person. She's amazing." So I sent her a message via Instagram, and we connected. Amazing lady, incredible speaker. Talk about coming and creating something from nothing. Um, but she's sitting behind me, like in the row behind me. And on the stage is this man speaking. His name is Tim Story. And I'm listening to this man speak. He is the most dynamic speaker I have ever heard in my life to this day. And on the stage, he's like, "So basically, I'm the person that helped Robert Downey Jr." And I texted Gloria and I said, "I need to meet this man. I need this guy's help." And as soon as I said that from the stage in front of, at the time, it was only 2,500 people. And now Grant's got 30,000, 40,000. As soon as I said, "I need this man's help," Tim said, "Do you know how many people say, 'Timmy Story, I need your help'?" And Gloria just started laughing. So I beelined backstage and I met Tim because we were in this, we were both speaking or performing on stage. And from that day, that man has become my coach. And it's ironic that you mentioned that because I was always searching for him. And RDJ built his life back, but he had someone there, just like you're doing for people, to say, "You can do it. You can go this way." But I can tell you from my own experience, if there's a question, Tim is able to look at it objectively and go, "Okay, let's look at it this way. What's stopping you?" And so ironic that you mentioned that because that is the person that I look at in growth and comebacks and ultimate comebacks. And I also look at the people behind Robert, such as Tim Story. And that's what I think you do, just seeing you. I think you open that up to people to allow them to see their potential and help them grow. So I'm grateful that you came on, John, and I hope that we can continue these conversations. Is there anything you want to leave us with as we're going out?
Yeah,
Yeah.
one of the things that we don't take in account as much as we should is celebrating our uniqueness and the superpowers that we possess.
Mm.
And so the thing that I want to leave people with is the greatest person that you are ever going to meet on this earth is the person who you stare back at in the mirror. But the biggest critic that you're ever going to meet is that person as well. And the sooner you learn how to cross the chasm between that critic and the superpowers that you possess, the more impact that you're going to have on the world and the more inspired and happy that you are a superhero yourself. Because I believe we have everyday superheroes walking all around us, and they're not Iron Man. That's not who you need to be. All you need to do is touch one human and make their life better, and it creates a ripple effect. And I think that's what we're called upon to do.
I so agree with you. I cannot thank you enough again for reaching out and coming on. I think there's some more stuff that we need to do together, and certainly we need to meet in person. And I'm going to take us out. Listen, for those of you who have been following me for a while, you understand that this is where my trajectory has been mostly my entire life, even when I was performing. For those of you who are following me anew or maybe coming on because, John shared this, this is what life should be. You should be living your dreams. You should be living your goals. And those moments of pause, those moments of obstacles, those things that are standing in your way, you can overcome them. And I say your destiny is waiting. It's up to you to go and get it. We'll see you on the next one. If you like the content of Star Power, we'd love to hear it. Give us a like and share it out to your friends.